Got our fingers crossed. One of the things that we do have the capacity to do now is there's a questionnaire and answer. So if you look on the bottom tab for your, I guess the Zoom browser or whatever, you'll see a Q&A thing there. So we would love to have your questions kind of throughout the session. So much of this is your questions will be very relevant as we're talking about a particular topic. So please feel like you can add those in. What we'll do is that our tech staff, Susie, who's typically our youth coordinator, is handling that part of it. So she's just going to like actually just say a question out to us that we will kind of, then answer on the spot. So today our focus is really about what's a parent's experience? What happens once you have gone in and you've gotten a pretty heavy diagnosis that your child is kind of in the realm of complex mental health challenges, and what does that mean? How does that change your world? And we just felt like it was important to be really real. So we're bringing parents to you who have kind of walked this walk for several years to kind of share their experience, let you know things to be aware of, resources that you might tap into, kind of how it changes your world, kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly of it. And again, I think it's just a really authentic conversation that we want to share with you, just to kind of help parents get started and to really kind of understand what your new normal may look like. It's certainly not defined. I think everybody has a very unique story, but I think it gives you kind of an idea of, what things may look like and what it may feel like as you're going forward. And I think particularly is the idea that I keep coming back to is I have seen so much positive come out of when parents start connecting with each other. So we would love for this to be kind of a platform to launch that opportunity. If you were out in the state of Idaho feeling really isolated, is that there are parents who understand your experience, and we would love to help you all connect some of those dots. So it's a lot of information sharing, like I said, resources, experiences, ask some questions. I'm gonna let parents introduce themselves, and I'll start with Janet and just kind of go around and say what you want. Remember, guarding in terms of, your own sense of privacy. So
I have no sense of privacy, so I'm going to start. I'm Janet Hecky. I have 3 children. My oldest son, Cody, passed away 7 years ago from suicide. He had a severe mental health disorder for many years. And I have a neurotypical son and a daughter with Angelman syndrome. So I've been part of the Yes Parent Network for about 3 years now, and I love being able to bring parents together and get information out to you all. And we hope that some of the discussion today resonates with you, and we hope that that you really just enjoy the conversation and maybe find some things that are helpful and make some new connections, and maybe reach out to us so that we can connect you with other parents.
My name is Ronnie Delaney, and I am a parent of 5 children. Well, some of them are children still, but my 5th one, he's not biologically my son, but I've had him since he was 3 weeks old, so he is my son, and he has several diagnoses of SEDs and along with cognitive disorder because of prenatal exposure to illicit drugs, including meth. So he is 11 now, so I think he was about 4 when he started walking and talking and starting school, when we started really seeing behaviors. And we see some in other parts of our family too, and it's been quite a ride and quite a different way of parenting from my other 4.
And I am Christina Shallies, and I had 2 children that also came into our family through adoption. So I have never parented biological children or neurotypical. Both of our kids do have SEDs, severe emotional disturbances, as well as our son has neurodevelopmental. So it's also a developmental disability. So just kind of working our way through that system, and we've had them for 5.5 years. I have also worked as a professional in the field. I have a degree in social work. I work in early intervention and foster care adoption. And I just really want to be able to take things that I have experienced in life and to be able to help other people to hopefully not have to reinvent the wheel and not have to go through the same things that I did, and just reduce the struggle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of like experience to draw
Yeah.
on here, but all these years collectively together, and yeah. So I guess first off, is just like for a parent who is just stepping into this world, their child has just recently been diagnosed with a mental health disorder and one that qualifies them into SED, severe emotional disturbance. I mean, what should they expect? I mean, all of a sudden it's like, what? What is this? What does this look like? What do I do? So from that initial kind of diagnosis and stepping into a new world, what do you think right off the bat? What do they anticipate?
Well, every person is different for one thing, and it's gonna be, if you've already had children, it's gonna be totally different. It's gonna be different from, we're all, I'm sure, had different experiences, and the thing is to remember that you're not alone, and that you can reach out to parent groups or federations for families and get a lot of support and direction on which way to go to get help. And but your life is going to change quite a bit. And I mean, I used to have a job outside of the home as a school bus driver, but I have worked with kids since my oldest, actually since I was a teenager, but babysitting was the thing. But it is so different, and it can still be a positive experience, and it's just different, and you're going to see a lot of changes.
I think probably the biggest thing for me is being able to accept that there's some loss here, and that there's a grief process that you go through, because life looks different than you had thought or anticipated or hoped for. And that doesn't mean that it's all bad, but just coming to terms with those differences and giving yourself permission to grieve that, and knowing that that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you, or that you're not strong and you're not healthy, that grief is normal when there is something that you have lost.
So can you expand a little bit on that when you say grief? Grief for what?
Grief
what is it that you feel like that you have lost?
Well, I mean, there's so many things that are just different. So I think that I felt as though, I should be able to work. I should be able to work full time. We should be able to have, so many families have two working parents. And our reality is not that we can do that because of the services and because of our children's needs. And so things just look a little bit different. I am still working, but not as much as I had hoped. And so it's also kind of my identity has changed, right? I was working full time, and I had a lot of my identity in my professional role in life. And so it has caused me to also look at who I am, which has been really good. But it's a process, it's a journey. And so I think that coming to a point where I could accept that I didn't have the ability to do all of this by myself, and that we couldn't do all of it by ourselves, and that we needed to ask for help, and starting therapy myself, admitting that I needed that emotional support, that my husband needed it, that we need it together, that we need it as a family to help us work through. I think that one of the things that we've talked about in the past as far as grief goes is that my brother passed away 10 years ago. And when I was going to therapy for that, the counselor said, when you have a huge loss in your life, and it's not just death, but when you have a huge loss in your life, your brain literally cannot handle that change in reality as quickly as it happens. That's why grief comes in waves. And so it comes in waves because otherwise it would literally kill you.
Knock you out.
It would knock you out. And so there have been times that I have felt like, okay, I've done the processing. I have accepted my children's diagnoses. I have accepted this reality. And then something happens in interaction with their peers, or an interaction, just things that take place, and I grieve it again. And
So I would think there'd be certain milestones
yes,
that are
definitely
different with your children, and you have this
Absolutely.
expectation that your kids are going to get to a certain age that something's going to happen. It's not going to happen.
right.
That
Like,
there's a sense of loss, like
right. Like
Yeah.
sleepovers. My kids are they've been really wanting to talk about sleepovers. I'm not sure what that's going to look like for a family. And it's different. And so they want it to happen, but I don't know what that'll look like for us. And so many friends that we have that have kids the same age as ours, they've done sleepovers several times, and my kids get upset that they
Right.
haven't been able to. And so that's the part that I think, that kind of grief process, that their childhood is going to look different than mine did.
Right.
And knowing that I still have to make the decisions that are best for them and best for our family as a whole, regardless of how hard it is.
Okay, but you say that it's a process, and that
It is a process,
working
it's a
your way
journey.
through the process, it sounds like it's really important.
Well, I think giving yourself the grace to experience the grief and recognizing that your loss, while your child is still there, the loss is the expectation of what that child's future is going to look like, right? It's like you said with the sleepovers, but it could be, I'm not going to experience my child having boyfriends and girlfriends or getting married or the delayed milestones, right? When we're raising these children, when I raised my neurotypical kids, especially when they're very young, it's milestone after milestone after milestone. And you're constantly being, engaged with other parents of neurotypical kids that are, my child's, if he says no one more time, and you think, oh, I'm probably never going to hear my child say no. Or, my child doesn't say no, my child slams the door and says, I'm coming for you now. It's like, it's totally, your experience is so different from what you imagined it would be. And every time you're faced with that, it is triggering. It does trigger that grief again and that wave of feeling totally overwhelmed and what am I doing wrong? We have such a sense of being responsible, especially when they're little itty bitty. Like we're responsible for them becoming as their peers are.
Right.
And it's just, that's not developmentally what's going to happen for them. And there's a grief process in accepting that and not being mad over it, but then also accepting that it means I have to parent in a way that all of my family and all of my friends don't really understand. They don't have to parent that way, and the way I end up parenting doesn't look like that at all. And I have to be okay with that, and that's a hard place to come to.
It is because people don't always understand.
Right, they don't, and what their ideas, even if they're highly educated, but if they're not going through it with a child who needs the extra help and has the SEDs, I mean, our lives change from moment to moment. Their moods change from moment to moment, and that's happens everywhere, no matter where we're at. And we don't want to be too hard on ourselves either, because that will totally bring us down and we won't be able to cope. And you have to be able to cope for a child.
Well, and you said in your experience, you've lost relationships with family members and friends that were part of your core support group.
Right. Yeah.
Right? And then you go through this experience, and initially a lot of parents, a lot of other people's response is, oh, well, just do this. This worked for me. Or they'll minimize it. Oh, my kid does that too. But it's like, we're not catastrophizing.
This is real.
Right. This isn't really my kid just melting down when we tell them they can't have a candy bar checking out of the grocery stand and pouting. Right. This is our kid. This is our kid picking up every single thing on the conveyor belt and chucking it at the person behind us in line because we told them they couldn't have candy.
And a certain punishment is not going to stop that.
Right. This wasn't brought on because we didn't discipline our children.
It's not poor parenting.
Right. We're not.
It's mental health.
Right.
So there's what I hear you saying is like the traditional parenting, when you figure out that's not working, and moving to a non-traditional parent that's effective with your child. But where do you go? How do you find out how to do that? Where are the resources and skills and ideas and that help you to figure out what works for the child that you have and their meeting their needs?
Therapy.
Okay.
So our kids receive a lot of services through Northwest Neurobehavioral Health, and so we have a lot of different people that we are involved in. And I'm just not afraid to say, okay, this is what we are dealing with. What resources should we look into? And so I've read a lot of books. I've done a lot of webinars. I'm involved in a lot of Facebook groups about different types of parenting because my peers just don't live it. They just don't understand. And so I've gone to a lot of adoption and foster care conferences. I've done trauma training. I've done a lot of different things.
So you have really reached out looking for information.
Oh my
to
goodness.
help and
but that's
support
me.
you.
I'm very much an extrovert. I'm like, I'm like, what do I need to do? What do I need to learn? What do I need to do differently? Because this is working.
And me too. I've reached out and done research too, and I'm the oldest of four, and I had kids already, and I've always kind of been bossy.
A mothering type.
Yes, I'm the mothering type. It sometimes carries over too far, but when it comes to your child and getting their needs met and their education met and protecting them from, like the school, if they're not getting the right things. But I've also had a lot of help with different people, with therapists and Carol. She's helped me. I mean,
Absolutely.
we've been on the phone for years, but we just finally met. But and then with the where he gets his services too, that Star, Jessica Trent, she's been a total help from the very beginning, and I'm just not satisfied sometimes with what the school or somebody has to say. And being the mom I am, I've had to march to the school district special ed department because I knew what he needed and they didn't get it. And just getting information from other people, other parents.
Yeah,
and,
I'd say this type of interaction.
Yeah, and
having
it-
peers. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to
Change your peer group.
Sometimes you have to go
Yeah.
for it, and read up on it and use what works. And
See.
seminars too.
And I wish I had the gumption of you ladies. I mean, when I was raising Cody, he appeared very much neurotypical in a school setting, in an outside the house setting. His issues were far more prevalent at home than they were in other places. And so it was very easy for me to believe it was my parenting. I was told by professionals it was my parenting. I was told by the community around me. Other people didn't know. And I think if there's one thing that I would encourage all families to do, it's to ask, how does my child's diagnosis impact their behavior? Like, what does
Absolutely.
it look like for them? Especially if you have, early or late, because early you don't know what their personality necessarily would typically look like, right? But for me, later in life, it was, Cody was preteen teenager when he started to really have some significant issues. And so how much of that is typical teenage angst and typical, in your face because you're my mom and I'm rebelling and whatever else, and how much of it is the fact that he has a severe emotional disturbance, because I would have parented him differently had I understood and been able to ask the doctor, okay, so he has bipolar, he has whatever, right? What does that look like? Like, here's a typical day. Here's a typical interaction with my son. What part of that is just typical teenage behavior, and what part of that is his emotional disturbance, and how do I need to parent it differently? Because it would have given me permission to not escalate with him, right? I mean, he spits in my face, I take away a privilege. He does this, I take away another privilege, and it was just compounding things.
Right.
And I think the courage that you all have to recognize that a severe emotional disturbance is a medical issue, right?
Absolutely.
We don't
Yes.
get that a lot, that it's a medical issue.
Many
our
people do not believe
perception
that. Right.
is that it's behavioral, and behavioral is a result of how they're parented. And you have that issue with people with developmental disabilities when they don't appear to have, when they look neurotypical on the outside, but all of our children look pretty neurotypical on the outside. And so it's not a broken arm you can see. It's not a disability you can see to then give parents an accommodation. And so consequently we don't want to. And I think that's the biggest thing, is just to go, if your experience is not normal, and so much so that you sought out somebody to professionally look at your child and say, is what I'm experiencing normal, then go beyond that. Talk to other parents and talk to the professionals and say, what part of this experience, of his experience, his behaviors, his world, is because of this? And then what are ways to mitigate and treat that?
Yeah, and make sure that the people you're asking that of, what is normal and what is neurotypical, are people who have an understanding of both sides.
Right.
Because if you ask, I at least, I have many friends who love our family, they love me, they love our kids, and out of a desire to help in some way, because they just feel so helpless, they will try to normalize behaviors. Oh, my son does that too. I know your son does do that, but your son does it one time a day instead of 100.
Right.
And so it's different, and it's okay for it to be different. And it's okay to say, I know every kid does do it to a point, But making sure that the people that you're asking it, that you're really wholly embracing and accepting what they're telling you about what is normal and typical, normal or typical, whatever you want to say, that those are the people that truly have an ability to know this is an exception.
And I would also, like, within the social world, but also within the professional world.
Absolutely.
I think that idea now is that when you go in and you see a doctor and they tell you this, is that, you really need to like be kind of doing your own research and getting your own information to make sure it's validating what you think.
Right.
And the same thing, just because a professional says you need to do this, this, and this, is that, is make sure that that fits with what you feel like is right for your child.
And your family.
And your family, and ask questions from others and get second opinions and back it up. I think you said with research and attending, different webinars or trainings or opportunities that you have. Because there's a lot of folks that are coming from a position where they think they understand a particular diagnosis, but they really don't have the depth to really be helping as much as they think. So it can send you down the wrong path. So when you're a parent, when your mom kind of red flag starts waving, listen to it.
Absolutely.
Because I think you all really know when it's right or when it's not right.
And if you do try something a professional recommends and it makes things worse,
Stop.
ask somebody else.
Stop doing that. Yeah.
Like understand that, okay, because like you said, a lot of professionals have a breadth of knowledge and understanding about something, but they might not have the personal experience.
Right.
And it's a hard thing to convey to somebody what living with it every minute is really like.
Right. And I tell people too, I say, these are the diagnoses we have now. However, I'm not sure what is going to stick forever, because I think that everybody that I take my kids to for an evaluation can find their expertise within the behavior. And so I'm not saying that the diagnoses are not valid, but I think that an OT can see the same behavior and think it's sensory, and a counselor can see a behavior and think it's emotional. And so what we do is we start with physiological responses. So okay, we're going to do a sensory activity, and if that doesn't stop it, then it's not sensory. And then we look at it emotionally. And so making sure that you're using several different approaches and not just buying into it, just one, and being convinced that that's exactly what's happening, because it's too hard, at least for me, it's too hard to accept that this is emotional.
Right.
I want to believe that it's physical, because that means it can be cured and it can be treated, and sometimes it simply can't. In that moment, sometimes they just need to release whatever it is that's happening, and you can't stop it.
Right. Because we don't know what they're thinking either, and what they need or what's triggering could be something they're thinking about too. I mean, it's going to change right then. And what we or other people around us think might be just, even some professionals have said, he's just attention seeking or something like that. And
But you know what, even if he is, right?
Right.
What if, because of our kids' stories and some of the lives they've lived, what if they haven't received as much positive attention as other kids have? So is that a problem for them to be seeking attention? No, we need to teach them how to seek it in a positive way. Right? So, yeah.
And sometimes it's just, because it's going to take longer for our children to get past it or learn better behaviors.
So as you say that it takes longer, and I'm thinking of a parent I know whose child is graduated from high school and has actually gotten into college, and with great boldness and confidence, she says, if other people looked at the way I parented, it would be considered bad parenting. Slap that label on there. But she knew, because of the work that she does, that this is what her child needed, and was able to provide that. And I admire her so much, because she was confident enough that she would do it, and she wasn't worried about what other people were going to say, because she just had enough success.
It's a journey to get there sometimes.
Yeah.
Right. So where she started when her daughter was young compared to where she was when her daughter graduated from high school was probably very much a journey. And again, I look back to, I think that you gain the confidence when you are in community with other people. And you have that support, and you have those conversations. So I think if you're isolated and you're trying to figure it out on your own, you're not reaching out for help, a lot of times you're trying things that may not work. Your box isn't big enough. So it's really about, having a toolbox and adding as many tools as you can, and figuring out which of those tools works, and using the resources. And I think like we talked the other day, it's like there's a vulnerability in
Oh, yeah.
asking for help when things aren't working.
Right.
Is how, where, you know, that sense of I have to reach out, but it's really hard to reach out.
I had to hit rock bottom before I was willing to, because I had all this training. I mean, I was working with people in a professional capacity that were parenting kids
Mhm.
with my similar kids' needs. And so it was very hard for me to acknowledge that it was different. It was different to talk with people about their children and what I know. I have all this head knowledge, I have all this book knowledge, but when it is your child and you are emotionally invested in them, you don't have the same ability to apply that information.
Mhm.
It's just a different relationship.
Mhm.
And so getting to a point where I could acknowledge that my relationship was different and I needed support from another professional to say, okay, I know you know this, but I'm gonna remind you. Like, okay, you're right.
So being vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I've seen time and time again in the last 3 years, parents that when they meet other parents that have similar experiences, it's, first of all, it's probably the first set of parents that they've really met, or maybe they have one or two, but to sit in a group with 5 and 6 and 10 other parents who have a similar life experience to you, I have seen it absolutely break people down and build them all back up in the same hour of just sitting there with people and realizing that, oh my gosh, I thought it was me, or I thought I was alone, or I didn't think other parents had to go through this. And to recognize that we've all given things up, because as you just heard these ladies articulate all the different things that they have to do for their children, the appointments they have to go through, and the research that has to be done, and all the rest of this, just to validate their experience, right? It's, your life is changed, and it's not going to look like your friends' lives and your parents' lives, and some of those connections you may lose, and you feel very alone. And your children hit milestones more slowly, so everything about your world isn't about doing things in a timeline that's even normal, let alone in a parenting way that's normal. So I love that we've been able to connect some parents to each other and share their experience. And for me, it was transformative. It was the first time in my life that I realized that my son didn't die because of me. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't something that I missed or something that I didn't do.
Right.
It was, and that I wasn't a human witch.
Right.
I literally went through life because my anxiety level went through the roof.
Absolutely.
Because I was walking on eggshells every day, and it's what we do when we're worried about the interaction that our child's going to have at school or on the play date or when we go to the grocery store or whatever that is. And when you talk to other parents and you realize that their intensity level and their anxiety level and their, it isn't helicopter parenting. It is the genuine concern that your child is going to be able to function on an even remotely normal level as an adult. And every day, that's our strive to get there.
But I'd like to add a little bit. Parents, I know some parents who have been afraid to reach out, like they're afraid of CPS, getting involved and judging, which, that has happened to some.
That's a reality.
It is,
Right.
it
Yeah,
is a reality. And, they're afraid from others' experiences or their own past experiences that, they're going to come in and take your child away. And sometimes that happens and they get lost in the system and, they get worse, but you can't be afraid. If anyone is afraid to reach out for the help, then, look for parent groups because they will definitely send you in the right direction and help you.
Yeah, and I've been that person. I was scared. I was scared because I had worked in foster care. I had seen, and so I was. Now that we have been several years into therapy and we have this support system, I actually said to my husband the other day, I'm really shocked nobody ever called CPS because sometimes our kids are just really loud.
Right.
And I talked to our neighbors. I'm like, please talk to me and find out what was happening because the blood curdling screams are a little bit terrifying to me inside the house. And so, but what I literally had this moment where I thought, but you know what? If somebody called CPS today, I have all these people that live life with us that would say, hang on, wait just a minute. That is actually not what is happening here.
Right.
We know this family, we've walked along. And so even though asking for help made me feel the most vulnerable, since I am getting help now, I actually feel far less vulnerable. to something happening to my
And
children.
it gives you so much more courage to parent your kids without fear.
Oh
I
my
think the
goodness,
worst
yeah.
decisions I have ever made in my life in parenting
Mhm.
was when I parented out of fear. I
Absolutely.
was afraid of either my child's response or my ex-husband's response or the community response or something like that. And it universally makes me make terrible decisions.
Mhm.
And there is power in knowing other people who are walking the journey with you.
Yes.
It's
And-
very empowering.
And being able to sometimes say to people like, I've had people question the way that we do things, and I have like for how we share our story with our kids. So wow, she knows a lot about, like, she uses really intense language. I'm like, yeah, you know what? We have been told by her therapist that we should answer her questions truthfully, and so we're not making these decisions by ourselves. And it just gives some validity to
Right.
that, like that we're not doing this all on our own. And I mean, if you don't have a therapist, that's fine too. I just feel it does feel really empowering to be able to say we have your support.
So when you were talking about CPS, and I know that having talked to many parents, that is a real fear they have. I was going to say, it's like jump back, because a couple of months ago we had a parent do a webinar with one of the CPS administrative staff from the home office, and that's what they discussed, is her experience walking through what parents need to know, how parents should respond. And I think it was a really powerful webinar that gave a lot of information for that idea of trying to kind of diminish some of the fear of what that experience may look like, and how to, what to do if the call is made. So I would encourage anybody to look at, I think if you go to the Federation YouTube site, it's archived there, and really valuable information to back up. Yeah.
That's great.
So I think one of the things we also talked about the other day is like, is there anything like you wish that someone had told you you had known as you stepped into this? Is there like little nuggets that you're like, if only I'd known that in the beginning, it would have like saved me a lot of grief or stress, or helped me shortcut things along the way?
Well, I just found out last week that
Christina, just last week.
when I met with all of you, that we could have gotten support, my husband and I and our family, through our children's Medicaid. So I have been paying the copay through my private insurance, my husband has, and then we have been doing some family counseling, he and I. And granted, we have other things that we're working on, but most of our struggles relate to the parenting of our children with their unique needs. And so finding out that we could bill it through their Medicaid so that we didn't have that additional cost,
Right.
is really beneficial, because we're talking $100 a month, and that's a lot of money, and so I wish I would have known that. So,
Okay, so to explain that a little more, maybe your insurance work, you could explain it too. So your child can see a therapist on a regular basis, but also Christine is telling us that
If you have a child with a severe emotional disturbance or a significant developmental disability and they have Medicaid, then Medicaid does cover therapy related to that child's disability or diagnosis for the family, or the parents.
so with the child not being present.
With the child, without the child present, which is very unusual. 99% of all Medicaid funding is the child must be present for reimbursement.
does it have to be with that child's therapist?
No.
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 See, I need to call my counselor.
And
It's
it
on
can
my
be
list.
more than once a week also.
And,
I was
and
so
this was
excited.
Ronnie's.
Just
This was
to
Ronnie's
say,
nugget that she
I
brought
know.
us, so.
Yes.
Find
Opting care
people.
coordinator
Find
is
people like
told
this.
me that, sometimes, I was at that point where I was just so anxious and lost and a lot going on and not knowing what to do. And I could hardly hold it myself together. And so how could I expect to do that? And that's a good thing about the YES program, because it involves the whole family, because your child affects the whole family. And if the family's not functioning well, that child's not going to function well either, and it's going to be more chaotic. And also I found out that the original, the first meeting is not. It doesn't cost. It's free for the first meeting at Liberty.
Oh, so the independent assessment is absolutely free. So if you
Yeah, there's no
suspect
cost
that
there.
your child has a severe emotional disturbance and you haven't really had it checked out at this point, you can contact Liberty Healthcare, and they will do a completely independent assessment with the CANs. And we've done a webinar on the cans before too. So if you want more information about the cans, please go look at that webinar because it really does go in depth. And we also did an access model webinar with David Welch from Medicaid that talks about how to access Medicaid, how to go to Liberty, what the process looks like, how you'll go through it. There's a few things that have changed. It used to be that Liberty did what's a shortened version of the cans. And then if you did qualify for services and you could potentially qualify for Medicaid, and also the Department of Behavioral Health would do the full cans. That process has changed a little bit since we did that webinar, where Liberty now is doing the complete cans. So it does streamline it for the family, so we don't have to tell our stories over and over. And I think that's one of the things that, and you talked about what I wish I knew, what I wish somebody told me. There's two things. One, telling your child's story over and over is traumatizing to you, and it's traumatizing to your child. And that's a real thing. Like, it has real consequences on your body. And as a result of all of this, I've done a lot of research on chronic stress because I wanted to understand how did I go from what I used to think was a pretty easygoing, intense. I always have had an intensity about me, but things didn't really ruffle my feathers a lot when I was younger. And going through this whole process of raising Cody and Lee and Katie and going through that process, like I said, I felt like I became the human witch. I was just constantly, someone would walk through the room too fast, and I felt like, but we didn't do anything. I'm like, yes, you did.
That sounds
vaguely
familiar.
Right? Well, what I've learned is that that's a result of chronic stress. And we talked about, PTSD and how that's a new, 20 years ago, people discounted PTSD, right? Nobody really believed it was a real thing. Now we have all of these soldiers that come back from war and they truly have PTSD. But as a friend of mine likes to say, there's no P in my PTSD. There's no
No,
post.
we discovered it's parenting.
Parenting chronic stress disorder.
Yeah, right. Trauma stress disorder.
So there are real things, real impacts of cortisol in our body that is part of the reason that we do change. The effects of the chronic stress do fundamentally change us and reduce our ability to tolerate all kinds of things outside. So to cut yourself some slack and to have grace for the fact that, I just yelled at my kid and they probably didn't deserve it. But it's the reality that we live in, and I can apologize and I can forgive myself and I can work to do better and I can recognize when it's happening so I can start to put things in place so that I don't do it again. And
Right. And I think that's one of the things that I think that I want to make sure to give hope is that I had some things from my own childhood that I had thought that I had resolved, or my prior to parenting that I thought that I had resolved. And I hadn't, and I had ways that was manifesting in my life, but I had just kind of accepted that as my personality. Parenting kids from trauma, specifically for me, kids who've experienced trauma, will bring out every single trauma in your life in a way you never thought possible. And I got to a point where I had to face it. I had to face it to be able to heal. And I am a different person today in the way I respond to family members, in the way I respond, not always in an emotional time with my children, but I have boundaries now where I did not have them before. And so I am a healthier person, which means I can take better care of them because I didn't know I was triggered. I didn't realize that's what was happening, and I didn't realize it was triggering unresolved trauma within me. And so I had done that, and it's painful, because boy, it is hard. Years of therapy. As painful as it is, I am grateful because even though it was hard, I feel better. I feel better every morning because I don't feel this need to control. I don't feel this need to try to just please everybody all the time. Certain things that they were my own response to trauma. And so because I've lived through that, I can understand when my kids are doing that. I'm like, oh, okay, that's a people pleasing thing. Let's work on that because I've done it myself. I've done that work. And so then I can take that information and help my children.
So tell me a little about self-care, because I think a lot of times when we talk to self-care with parents, they just bristle.
the first thing to do is take care of ourselves.
Where am I going to fit that? But we know that it's essential. So, I mean, how do you realistically, what does it look like? How do you fit it in? Does it happen, or does it just get thrown out the window as this great concept that is unrealistic?
it has to happen.
Mhm.
If it
Thank
does
you.
not happen, like, even though you don't want to, even though you think I can't, the times in my life when I have not, I have burnt out.
Mhm.
And then I've been significantly more unhealthy than I would have been if I would have maintained. This is my self-care. This is part of my self-care.
Mhm.
And being able to tell my husband, me being in relationship with people who understand and being able to take things that I have gone through and help other people gives me purpose. And it helps me to feel as though there is purpose in my struggle.
Mhm.
And it fills my cup.
Right.
Being able to access respite for our kids, you know, and being able to just give myself permission to go sit at a coffee shop by myself, drink coffee and breathe.
Mhm.
I just breathe in and out, over and over and out, talking to me.
Whatever works
on
for
the book.
you.
Yeah.
There's got to be something. Just
So how about
Yeah.
for you? What, like, do you
I
actively pursue self-care? What does that look like?
I've done fingernails. I've done hair.
Mhm.
But mostly what I do is I'm a real crafty person and like to do crafts. And most of it is still packed away, but even just coloring, and it relaxes me, and that's my self-care. And if I if I forget it, you know, you feel it, you know, you feel so tired, and you can't go on, you know. So you have to find something that works for you, and you're reminded in the therapy that I'm able to go to, or we're all able to go to. They will remind you too that you got to take care of yourself, and it's a true fact. And mentally and physically, you have to have that time
Mhm.
to allow yourself to breathe, like you said, some peace.
I think the thing is that what self-care is looks different for everyone.
Absolutely.
And like my concept of self-care was, you know, oh, you need time for yourself. Well, when you're managing all of these other things and business and this and that and the other thing, by the time you get done with the things you have to do in the day, like this is not the optional list. This is the slide into home base, and these are the things that have to get done by the end of the day. You're exhausted, right? And so all you do is you flop down in front of the TV or whatever, and you do nothing. But that doesn't fill you back up again, right? That just lets you experience exhaustion. But what I've realized, and I did it to myself this summer, the very first thing I gave up was a lot of the work that I've done with the Parent Network, because I would get to 6 or 7 or 8 o'clock at night and finish the work that had to be done. And I just wanted to shut everything off. And what I realized was that I had some of these things that I had to do, and as soon as I did them, it's like, wow, I really feel that. I don't want to do this today. And I got at it a lot. And then I started to realize, oh my gosh, that's what self-care is. It's that it's doing whatever it is that when you walk out, you're like, yes, I feel energized and I feel awake and I don't care if it's 11 o'clock at night. If I do something, if I have a conversation with someone that I help, or I'm able to finish something that is productive and has an outcome, like, because you don't, with raising these kids, the milestones. So I always felt like, gosh, what am I doing? I'm not productive. I haven't accomplished anything today. When you get to the end of the day and you're still breathing, I say it's a good day. I got to the end of the day, I'm still breathing. It's a good day, right? But finding that thing that fills you up, and again, I just want to encourage parents, find other parents, call Carol, and get connected with other parents that have your similar experience, because for almost everybody, that's what I have found, one thing that fills you up, right? Is that connection with someone who's living a shared experience. And I think that's really important.
So what are some of the resources? I mean, so we have professional resources, and we'll talk about yes in just a second. But what are some of the other resources that you would suggest in terms of parents connecting with?
I would say Idaho Parents Unlimited, IPOL has been huge. I've been able to call them and talk about my kids' IEP and 504 processes, and been able to just really brainstorm what, with their particular needs, their particular diagnoses, what I can advocate for with the school district. That's been really big.
Okay, yeah, IPOL is a fabulous organization.
As
There's a lot of
particularly
work
with
them.
education.
Yeah.
I mean that's where their specialty focuses is with education. So.
And a good thing too now is that you're able to pull the team that's working with your kids together, and they don't have to volunteer their time. They can, each individual get paid by Medicaid, if it's Medicaid, where before, like I had good people, we still have them, that have come to the IEP meetings with me. We've been in there with, my 3 daughters and son-in-laws and everyone, his CBRS worker, case manager, DD manager, and everyone has been in there, and some on the phone. But and then I would have a email that I included that whole group in, which was called Team Dallas, but which Jessica gave me that name one time. But now, it's easier because they get paid for it, and
Is
so
that active now? Or
It
that-
is.
Yes.
I believe
Okay.
it is, yeah.
Yeah,
yes,
and that's through the YES program, like if your kids
It is.
qualify through.
If you have Medicaid
And-
services,
Okay.
and so, yeah, I mean, that gets in again to the access model, but if you don't currently qualify for Medicaid, but your child does have a serious emotional disturbance, the way to access the Medicaid, if you're eligible, is to go through Liberty, and that actually gives you access to Medicaid up to 300% of the federal poverty level, which is significantly different from the standard application process for Medicaid. But then yes, if you have Medicaid either from foster care, from adoption, from through the SED, through the SED qualification, or through a dual diagnosis with developmental disability, then Medicaid does reimburse that.
So talk a little bit about the Parent Network as far as a resource for parents.
So the Parent Network was created actually through the Idaho Federation of Families. The Idaho Federation of Families is our backbone, really. So it's just started from some parents that were here that wanted to make sure that we had a voice in the creation of YES and the system as it developed. And so we have 2 parents from every region in the state. So there is a parent in your region that you can reach out to, and I recommend you call Carol and say, hey, I really want to get in touch with parents in our region, and she can put you directly into contact with them. I am the Region 4 representative here. There's a parent in Region 4 here, and 2 parents in Region 3, and again, every region in the state. But we have parents that work directly with the YES system development, so we are in meetings with Medicaid and Department of Behavioral Health and the State Department of Education and Juvenile Justice in terms of developing the system of care that is being implemented over really, I think, the next year. And then there'll be more to come in terms of getting it operationalized and working. But, so we do that, and then we also meet annually with the parents in the Parent Network, and then mostly our job is to connect with other parents and to facilitate these types of meetings. And if you have a newly diagnosed kid, or you're having a difficulty with your kid, or whatever it is, reach out to us. If you're struggling with access to a service, or a denial, or any of those kinds of things, you can reach out to us, and we can work to help you understand what the process is. We can work with you. We've had a parent actually go with another parent to an IEP meeting for their child. We've had families that have worked to help with residential services and other services. So.
I mean, and these are parents who have a pretty extensive experience of walking through the system through several years. So I think someone with the network has run into probably every obstacle that exists. And I think what things cool about the network part is if one parent doesn't really get it, they're like, wait, I know somebody who has a similar story.
Right.
So maybe connecting you to somebody else that's in the network. So there's a lot of experience within that group of parents. And the idea that it is kind of expanding.
And there's a lot of, like you said, a lot of depth of experience. We have really a wide range of every possible experience that, maybe not every possible experience, because everyone's is different, but there'll be someone who has experiences that are similar enough that you'll find there's a huge ability to connect.
And also the idea that we would love to see, with the idea of connection, is if you are living somewhere in the state and you would love to be able to get together, like what we did for coffee back in the springtime, is to help parents do that. Because if we have someone that's in the area that's part of the Parent Network, is that idea of can we bring a few parents together, and how can we kind of start expanding it to a larger group, and be it meeting coffee in the morning or doing something in the evening, or what works within your community, ways that we can support that type of one-on-one connection.
One thing that I would say that I didn't utilize for years, I didn't really think about it, is the people in the waiting room where you go for therapy. I have been able to make a really strong connection with a parent who is living a very similar story. And she'll text me resources throughout the day, I'll text her. And we do play dates with our kids, which sometimes, because they have similar needs, can be a little bit less talking time for us, a lot more supervision for us. But I have an ability to be really empathetic to her child, and she has an ability to be really empathetic to my children, because we're living a similar story. Like,
and the kids can be themselves too,
right?
With similar kids. I have a friend too that, you know, we're a little bit older, and so, you know, most people our age, you know, don't have young children, but we're able to get together. We've been doing it a lot lately and doing things together. And the kids, I mean, they bicker and argue, but you know, they're over it right then. You know, they don't hold grudges, and they have a great time. And we even get to do some of our own talking together and building each other up, which is a great thing.
Well, I think we overlook the fact that it just as much as it's great for us to see that there are other parents living our shared experience, it's great for our children to see that they're not some wackadoodle one-off that's, you know, like, you're the strange one, nobody's like you, right? It's like, no, there are other people that have experiences that are similar to yours, and they're great people. They're worth getting to know, just like you're worth getting to know, and that's a message I think that sometimes we don't necessarily give to our children.
And so when we talk with our kids, when they're interacting with kids who have similar needs, I'm able to speak about it in a different way than with a neurotypical peer, like in front of both children. I can say, I know that sometimes you struggle with this and sometimes you struggle with this. And so we all have things we're working on, right? And so we can talk about it in a different way. And it just, I don't know, I just think it gives them freedom to be themselves in a way that they don't have with neurotypical peers.
So let me jump back to one of the ideas you all had talked about earlier, like when we met last week, was that we do have a closed parent Facebook group that we started that was based out of the parents that met here. And your all idea was to really expand it kind of on a statewide basis, so that we have parents that are participating, attending in today's webinar. And if they're interested, I would say contact the Federation, because what we would like to do is to be able to create a larger Facebook, and it's a closed Facebook page. So there is that confidentiality, is that you would need to be a parent who is parenting a child with a severe emotional disturbance, but to start some of those conversations. And then like the grand idea would be, if it got large enough, it actually could split into something that would be more regional, so that you had parents in your, so it's kind of a baby step. We're just curious to see if it would work, and if there are parents out there that are interested, would benefit from it. So I would say definitely contact the Federation or email me directly, which is cdixon, DIXON, at idahofederation.org, if you are interested in being a member of the closed Facebook group, and see if we could start some conversations and sharing of information about the resources that are in Idaho, or just that idea of like, I'm struggling, and somebody else can say, been there, done that, you know, I'm with you. So yeah. So any like last minute nuggets, any things that we didn't hit on this morning that you just want another parent to know?
I think I want to expand just a little bit more on what might change in existing relationships.
Yeah.
And so I have had several relationships in my life that have changed dramatically. I just feel like it's really important to understand that people who are not walking this journey might think that we've talked about it a little bit, that they have the answer, that they know, but you can't know it if you're not doing it. I mean, I have people in my life who are willing to walk alongside me, but those people are willing to acknowledge, like, it must be really hard, I can't imagine. They don't try to fix it because they realize they don't have the tools to do that. And so many relationships just look different. And it's, again, a grief process, right? There's been a lot of loss of relationships not maintaining over the years of parenting my kids in the way that I had hoped that they would. And so there's been a lot of acceptance for me of that, and not feeling as though I am the one at cause of that, even when sometimes people have pointed their finger and said, it is you.
Right.
It is you. And I'm like, no. And even though initially I'm like, wait, is it? Is it me? Is it me? And I go really, really deep,
Right.
really deep to figure it out.
Especially those closest to you.
Yeah. The
They're
people that are supposed to love
criticizing
you.
or
Yeah.
And it's
Family.
family, right?
Family
I
more
mean,
than
you've
any-
lost experiences with family,
Yes.
and that's your support structure when you first have children. So.
Yeah. When you no longer have those people that you thought would be with you through thick and thin, it can take you down to a level that you can feel like, oh man, what's wrong with me? And so getting to a point where I was able to work through that with my therapist and with other friends and with my husband and with my own support system, and then realize that that doesn't mean that those relationships have to be gone.
Right.
It just means that they're not going to be able to be there for me in the way that I had thought and hoped they would. And so I just don't share information with them because they're not a safe person. And that doesn't mean that they're not like a safe person in life. They're not a safe person for this part of my life.
Right.
Because
They
they
just
don't get it. And no matter how hard and for how long, for how many years I've tried to explain it, they're just not able to. And so that's where that boundary piece that I said has come in. I used to think it was my job to educate everybody, and it's not.
It's exhausting.
It
So,
is depleting.
But then is it nice that if you have, it's kind of compartmentalizing, that if you have relationships that you're not going to go into the information. Is it a nice escape to be able to jump into a world where you're not having to talk about what's going on or explain what's going on, even though it's a very brief time?
Yeah, sometimes, like, it's nice to be able to just go to work and have people say, how are your kids? They're good enough. We're working through stuff, but we're good. And I just don't go into a lot of detail because that's not the space where I do that. I've had to learn that over the years, different things because it's just not that person's role in your life, and that's okay.
And that's okay.
That's okay.
Yeah. Okay.
It doesn't mean there's
That's
anything wrong with
huge.
them or with me
Yeah.
or with my kids.
But I think if that, like sharing that can just like shortcut somebody that it took you years to get through. If someone
So
can
much
grab that
pain.
and go, okay, I can own that. I see that and just put that on. You might have saved somebody a lot of therapy.
Please, I hope so.
Yes.
Janet or Ronnie, any nuggets that you want, like last minute to throw out?
Just remember, you're the parent, you're the boss, and when it comes to other people, school, therapies, whatever, and like you said, if something doesn't feel right, and you can change it, make it better.
You know them better than anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think along those same lines, if you're experiencing something that's challenging with your child, right, and you're getting feedback from the community or from people that's challenging, right, it feels judgmental, it feels whatever, think to yourself, if this experience was because my child had cancer, would their response be the same to me? And if the answer to that is no, then the chances are part of their response is because they're not considering a mental health issue a medical issue.
Right.
And that's a conversation that globally in this country and in the world we really need to have. We haven't gotten there yet.
Right.
But it is, for me, it's one of those ways that I have kind of shortcutted that judgment and gone, okay, they don't get it because they're looking at it from a perspective of this isn't a medical issue. And I know better now. I know this is my child's medical issue. And so I am doing what is medically appropriate for my child, and it shortcuts that judgment for me. It makes me feel like, okay, I get it. And I think that's helped me a lot.
Yeah.
Awesome. Ladies, thank you for sharing your stories.
Thank you.
I know that it's hard a lot of times to come out and be public about what's been going on. But I think you all know that in doing that, hopefully your information is helping somebody else path. And that they don't have as many bumps along the way as they're trying to figure out how to navigate personally through it, and then also as a family, and then also trying to access the services and supports along the way. So it's brave, it's courageous, but I also know that in your ability to share it is that you have done a lot of work. Not that it's easy.
No, it's not.
Yeah. So we appreciate it. So next month, Janet is back with us.
Yes. Super Janet.
Super Janet. So we're focusing next month on insurance, and the idea of like, how do you access what does insurance offer? How is it different? Because we've got Medicaid insurance, we've got private insurance, we've got DBH doing some services, So it's can people who are the experts at it find that it is challenging. So Janet's asked a lot of those questions. She's got a kind of a background in insurance billing, so I think she can really kind of hone in on what is it that parents want to know, and what do they need to know to be able to get the services that they're looking for, and how to work through some of those obstacles. We also have a survey we're going to send out hopefully this afternoon. It would be really, really helpful. We're going to make it super short. If you all would just complete the survey, it's just a couple questions, and then shoot that in an email back to us. As we get more proficient with our new platform, we're going to be able to add it right to the webinar, and you can do it like in 30 seconds as we finish the webinar. So thank you for joining us. We would love your feedback. We'd be interested in topics that you would like to hear about, how you felt like this new kind of setup went, and any other information that you'd want to share. So we look forward to seeing you next month. And again, thank you much.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I
Yeah.
appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, well, we're going to bring you back again.